Alright, everybody. So this is just a mini lecture topic on chapter 12. I chose a topic that, the detail in the book's not very expansive. So I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about a specific topic for physical development in middle childhood. So one of the topics that I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about are kind of, mental health disorders that could be seen in middle childhood. So let me try and find the slide. Oh, that's not it. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah. All right. So there's some behavioral issues that you may see in middle childhood depending on a variety of factors. So, family makeup, parental stress, being in lower socioeconomic statuses. Their IQ can have something to do with it as well. Socially, are they making friends? So there's so many different things that could impact emotional issues during middle childhood. But we do see that there's more common patterns that emerge. So this is when you start to see more aggression or defiance type of disorders being diagnosed, and also anxiety and other mood disorders being diagnosed. So sadness, depression in early childhood and younger, it's kind of difficult to diagnose these types of things. So sadness, depression, defiance, because they're not fully developed. So, I mean, it could be that, they're having a tantrum because, they're 2 years old or 3 years old and they can't regulate their emotions, right? But usually by this time in middle childhood, children should kind of understand their self-awareness and ability to regulate their emotions and engage in coping skills. So children who have difficulties with that, there could be a presence of some type of disorder there. So either like a conduct disorder or anxiety or mood disorder. Okay. So I don't know if you guys have heard of this one before, but this is a disruptive conduct disorder. So it's called oppositional defiant disorder. So with this one, basically, there's different criteria that psychologists, psychiatrists, or other doctors can diagnose with this. Basically, it has a pattern of angry or irritable mood. Typically, they're very argumentative, they're very defiant, and also you see a lot of vindictive behavior or vindictiveness. And all of these negative mood patterns related to hostility should be there for at least 6 months before diagnosing a child with oppositional defiant disorder. So, with that in mind, so there's either anger or irritable mood. So some examples of that is that maybe a child loses their temper very quickly. Maybe they just feel very irritable in a sense where they're restless and very touchy or easily annoyed. And then at times being just angry in general or resentful. Okay. And then we also have more hostile behavior as well. So being vindictive is one of those, and that's a very specific criteria, but basically it just means being spiteful and then trying to hurt others on purpose. That's being vindictive, where you try to purposely kind of see someone else in pain, or you find that you would like to do something like that. So there are children that have this type of behavior, and that's just being vindictive. We do have argumentative and defiant behavior, so maybe they don't really listen to the rules, so they argue with their parents a lot. They don't want to engage in any good doings, so they like to engage in more wrongdoings. And when they engage in wrongdoings, they really never take responsibility for their actions. So if they do something wrong, they kind of blame it on others. So those are just some examples of oppositional defiant disorder. So overall, typically you're going to see this type of behaviors with ODD in both home and school, and that's more common, but you can see it in one setting as well. But typically, if you see these behaviors, they're typically mirrored in these same environments. Okay. Okay. So you may want to wondering, okay, well, how does this present itself, this disorder? What are some causes of that? So there is research to show that children who have a negative family environment, so when they have many different caregivers and not a lot of stability, um, or if they're neglected, um, so neglectful child parenting styles, or they have parenting styles that are harsh and inconsistent, those children typically will have some oppositional defiant symptoms. Um, we also see that children who have ODD, they also have a second disorder as well. So there's this idea of comorbidity, and basically what that means is that when you have a disorder, it's very likely that you're going to have something that's similar to that as well that kind of impacts that disorder. So for example, I'll give you guys an example. So if you have someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder, right? They get panic attacks or they feel very overwhelmed and in stressful situations. We do see that those individuals have PTSD also have depressive symptoms, right? And that makes sense because they have all these overwhelming feelings and stress, and people who are more stressed, they're also more likely to be depressed, right? So going back to ODD, we do see that children who have this are also more likely to have ADHD as well. So that's a co-occurring condition. So another co-occurring condition with ODD is conduct disorder, which is right below that one. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that kind of makes sense. So in the last video, we talked about ADHD, if you remember. And if you think about it, if a child has, inattention problems, executive functioning issues, they're restless, hyperactive, well, we can see how those two disorders may be very related, right? Because children with ODD, well, they have all of these behavioral issues. So they're arguing, they don't want to follow rules, um, hostility, um, vindictiveness. Well, that may have to do with their inattention to be able to make decisions or self-regulate their emotions because of the ADHD, possibly. But this is just a pattern, so I'm not saying all children with ODD have ADHD or children with ADHD all have ODD, but we do see there's a common co-occurrence with that. Overall, with ODD, we do see that ODD can be gender related as well. So going back to what I said about ADHD, we do see that more boys are diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. So with that in mind, it's a male dominant disorder, and typically we tend to see it more oftenly in adolescence, but we can see it as early as middle childhood. So some risk factors, we do see temperamental is one of the risk factors. So in early childhood, if you see a lot of temperament issues, so they have high levels of emotions, they're not able to control their emotions, poor frustration levels, then it could be a predictor of having ODD. As I said before, environmental has a lot to do with it. So a stressful environment or inconsistent parenting could have an attribution to ODD. And then lastly, we do see that children with ODD, there's different abnormalities in the brain. So we do see that children with ODD, they do have some dysregulation in the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, which kind of makes sense because with the prefrontal cortex, it kind of controls how we take information in, how we solve issues, how we solve problems, being able to pay attention with that frontal lobe. And then with the amygdala, it's our emotion regulation center. So if there's dysregularities in that, then of course we can see why there's some emotional regulation issues if that brain structure is not working at capacity. So those are just some associations. We also see that overall that conduct disorder is very related to oppositional defiant disorder. So we'll go ahead and talk about conduct disorder. Okay. All right, so conduct disorder has to do with more persistent patterns of negative behaviors, so aggression, antisocial behavior, and kind of going against the rules or social norms. So with aggressive behavior, some examples can be that they often maybe bully to other children, maybe they threaten other children or even threaten their parents with certain things. or they try to intimidate other people. So that's kind of an example of some aggression. We also see that children with conduct disorder are more likely to engage in more, I'm trying to think of the word. Well, I don't want to say physical fights, but altercations, I guess. They engage in more physical altercations. And then also, aggression can be seen towards people or animals as well. So, an aggressive example of being aggressive towards, an animal or person is maybe using a knife, a bat, broken bottle, a gun. Obviously, those are very extreme examples, but those are one of them. So I will give you guys an example. A while back, a long time ago, I had, it was actually a girl that had conduct disorder issues, and she had aggressive behaviors. And one thing that she did do was she had her cat, and she put the cat in the dryer and had it rolling around in there. And she thought it was funny. So it's obviously some type of aggression towards an animal, and that would be an example of how conduct disorder can kind of manifest itself and become more serious. Okay. Okay. Let's see. So other examples is that maybe they're physically cruel to people. So maybe they, hit their siblings continuously. For example, I did have another child that had conduct disorder issues, and he would pee on his brother and sisters. So that's just one example of that. Also, destruction of property is an example of aggressive behavior. Um, Also, engaging in theft, so trying to steal someone else's items or trying to kind of go into someone's house without their permission, building or car. Hold on a second. I had a phone call. All right. Let's see. And then obviously with those are the aggressive persistent patterns, but then also antisocial behavior. So the antisocial behavior has a lot to do with just like not following the rules, not following the social norms. So maybe they often stay out late because their parents have rules about that, and typically that happens before the age of 13. Maybe they run away from home a lot. That's also an example, or they don't go to school. And that, I'm trying to think if there's any more. Nope, I think that's it. All right. So that's conduct disorder. So conduct disorder, like I said, is a little bit more persistent, a little bit more pervasive, I guess you could say, than oppositional defiant disorder. So there's a lot more antisocial behaviors going on, so more purposeful harm to others, I guess you could say. So being physically cruel to people and animals, or stealing from others, or engaging in more negative acts such as those. So with that in mind, there's different ways to kind of look into this disorder. So we do see that there's some risk factors for it. So again, some risk factors are temperament during early childhood. So if you have an infant that is under controlled, very highly emotionally reactive, usually lower intelligence scores are also associated with conduct disorder. And typically with IQ scores, we do see that children with lower verbal IQ are associated with conduct disorder. Environmental also, so like I said, family stress. So having parents that have inconsistent parenting styles, typically more related to more not engaging with the child, so neglectful parenting. A lot of parental rejection as well is associated with conduct disorder. So having a secure attachment is actually a protective factor in any of these disorders that we're talking about. So we do see that insecure attachments typically will have the ideas of parental rejection, which could have to do with engaging in more conduct issues. We do see that in general, children who grow up in larger families or frequent changes of parenting, so different caregivers coming in and out of their lives, we do see that there's more instances of conduct disorder. and also having exposure to violence in their neighborhood as an associated factor. So those are just some things that are related to conduct disorder. Okay. So in general, with conduct disorder, you're going to see more emotional dysregulation than ODD. So you're going to see a lack of remorse or guilt with conduct disorder, lack of empathy, so they're like callous. They really disregard others' concerns or feelings. They're more concerned about their own actions and about themselves and how they affect others. So they're not really remorseful for breaking the rules. They may think it's funny, or they may think they're in the right for doing so. They don't take responsibility for their actions. And then when it comes to performance, actually, we do see that children with conduct disorder don't really care about their performance at school. They feel that they don't need to put forth that much effort, so they're typically unmotivated. So those are just some things that we see. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about these two disorders because I think they're important and we don't talk about them as much. I will see you guys in the classroom. Have a good day.